Welcome to Sign Facts, where every movie hides a secret. Every scene tells a deeper story. And every frame contains details most viewers never notice, from legendary blockbusters and mind-bending science fiction to dark thrillers, unforgettable horror, and hidden cinematic gems. We explore the facts, theories, Easter eggs, behind-the-scenes secrets, and untold stories that make movies truly unforgettable. This isn't just watching movies, this is discovering what lies beneath them. Subscribe to Sign Facts and step beyond the screen. He keeps pushing Bear to invite Nikki out for drinks that very day instead of waiting for some perfect moment. Bear, on the other hand, wants to hold off until trivia night, since that setting would feel more casual, comfortable, and less intense. But Ian isn't interested in careful timing. He insists Nikki probably likes Bear too, and that the only thing standing in his way is his own habit of overthinking everything. Later, Bear comes home expecting an ordinary evening. Instead, he walks into something devastating: his cat lying lifeless on the floor. As the shock sets in, he realizes what happened. He'd accidentally left his medication somewhere the cat could get to it, and the cat must have swallowed some. The guilt hits him immediately. Completely broken, Bear breaks down crying. Afterward, he quietly cleans up, moving through the room with the numb sadness of someone who knows the mistake can't be undone. Later, he's lying alone on his bed, drained and silent, when his phone rings. It's Nikki. She apologizes for barely speaking to him earlier and asks if he's still coming to trivia night. Bear says he doesn't think he can make it, but Nikki keeps talking, trying to pull him out of his sadness. Then, out of nowhere, she shrieks as she's just dropped her crystal necklace down the drain. Hearing the panic in her voice, Bear changes his mind and agrees to come. On his way to meet everyone, he stops at a shop and buys her a replacement necklace. While browsing, he notices a strange little toy called the Wish Willow, and something about it catches his attention. The shopkeeper sees him looking and immediately warns him not to buy it. It's a collectible, she explains, but not the fun kind. Almost everyone who buys one ends up wishing they never had. Bear doesn't take the warning seriously. He laughs it off as creepy sales talk and buys it anyway. That night, trivia night is in full swing. When Bear arrives, the group is already there, a mix of friends and co-workers, including Ian, Nikki, and Sarah. Ian keeps nudging him to finally be honest with Nikki, but Bear freezes every time the moment gets close. He and Nikki take some shots, laugh together, and fall into the kind of easy back and forth that makes him feel like there might really be something between them. Still, every time he tries to steer things toward asking her out, someone interrupts. First Ian, then later Sarah. At one point the group raises their drinks in memory of Bear's cat. Sarah, who clearly didn't know until that moment, immediately hugs him to offer comfort. He accepts it, but his attention keeps drifting back to Nikki. By the end of the night, Nikki says she's exhausted. Bear offers to drive her home, and she accepts. Before they leave, she notices a homeless man nearby and gives him some money, a small act of kindness that makes Bear smile quietly and only deepens his feelings for her. During the drive, Nikki brings up his cat and tells him she's sorry. The conversation turns more personal after that. She says she's taking a couple of weeks off work to focus on her writing, admitting she feels trapped and frustrated with her life, like she needs distance from everything before she loses herself completely. Then she catches him off guard. He's the only person she feels she can really open up to. Bear starts to say he feels the same way, but his thoughts tangle, and instead he remembers the necklace and tells her he got her something. Nikki reacts with quiet uncertainty, saying gifts make her nervous and it throws him off. What little confidence he had disappears again. When they reach her house, she brings up Sarah, saying Sarah had been asking about him all day and wants to know how he feels about her. Bear quickly says he only sees Sarah as a friend. Nikki points out that it's obvious Sarah has a crush on him, then adds that when she herself has feelings for someone, nobody can ever tell. It feels like a door cracking open just slightly, but Bear doesn't know how to step through it. Nikki starts to leave, but Bear stops her one more time. This could be the moment he finally says what he's wanted to say all along. Instead, his nerves take over. He can't get the words out, so he changes the subject and rambles about things that don't matter. Nikki doesn't really respond. She just says goodnight and starts walking toward her house. Bear panics. As she walks away, the worst possible words come out of his mouth. Freaky Nikki. She spins around and marches back to the car, clearly irritated, and tells him never to call her that again. Then she looks straight at him and asks the question he's been avoiding all night. Does he like her? Bear goes completely silent. Instead of telling the truth, he stumbles through an answer about them being good friends. Nikki takes that in, says okay, and heads inside. Bear sits there, frustrated, knowing he just blew the chance he'd been waiting for. Then he notices the wish willow sitting nearby. Reading the label, he learns that breaking it grants a single wish. He doesn't take it seriously. In a careless, almost casual moment, he snaps it in half and makes a wish that Nikki would love him more than anyone else in the world. Bear is about to drive off when something strange happens. He looks up and sees Nikki standing outside her house, staring at him, as if something inside her has suddenly shifted. She walks back to the car and reminds him he said he had something for her. Caught off guard, he tells her he left it at home. She doesn't seem bothered. Instead she asks if he wants to come inside, saying that after losing his cat he probably shouldn't be alone. Bear sits there, confused, his eyes shifting from Nikki to the broken wish willow in his hand. The timing feels impossible. He looks back at her and quietly asks if she's okay. For just a second, her expression shifts, almost like she's caught herself doing something she doesn't understand. There's a flicker of awareness in her eyes, like she senses how strange this is too, but it passes just as fast, and she acts like nothing happened, climbing into the car. Before he can ask anything else, Nikki starts crying. Her voice breaks as she tells him her father has cancer and doesn't have much time left. That's why she doesn't want to be alone tonight. The confession immediately shifts Bear's focus away from how strange the moment felt, burying his confusion under sympathy. Nikki looks scared, vulnerable, desperate, so he decides not to push. They drive back to his place. Once inside, Nikki slowly looks around, studying every detail of the room, then smiles and says it smells like him. Unsure how to respond, Bear tries to keep things normal. He offers her the bed while he takes the sofa, but she doesn't want that. She asks him to stay in the room, to sleep in the same bed. He hesitates. The night already feels too sudden, too heavy, too strange, but she keeps insisting, and eventually he gives in. Without much warning, she takes off her shirt, leaving him stunned and unsure where to look. Nervous, overwhelmed, and clearly not prepared for where the night is headed. As they lie together, she slowly moves closer, the distance between them shrinking until the tension turns into a kiss. For a moment, Bear lets himself fall into it. This is something he's imagined for a long time, but suddenly Nikki pulls back, as if waking from a dream, fear filling her face. She apologizes, saying she's having a panic attack. Bear panics too, but not because of the kiss. He's worried about her. He stays with her through the night, trying to keep her calm and safe. She eventually settles, but he can't sleep. His mind keeps circling back to the wish willow, the shopkeeper's strange warning, and Nikki's bizarre shift in behavior. Unable to let it go, he starts searching online and finds message boards and old threads about it. Some people describe it as a real cursed object, something that grants wishes but twists them in disturbing ways. Others dismiss it as an internet myth, the kind of creepy collectible story people exaggerate for fun. Bear doesn't know what to believe, but after what he's just witnessed, the toy no longer feels harmless. When he gets up, he finds Nikki awake. She asks where he went, sounding oddly fragile, and tells him to come back and lie beside her. He doesn't argue. He returns to bed, even though he's still wide awake inside his own head. The next morning, Bear finds Nikki in the kitchen, and at first he can't process what he's seen. She appears to be performing some kind of unsettling ritual connected to his dead cat. The scene is disturbing enough to freeze him in place. When she notices him, She acts like it's nothing strange and calls it a memorial, said with a calmness that doesn't make him feel any better. Later at work, Ian pulls Bear aside, eager to hear what happened after trivia night. Curious, nosy, and excited in exactly the way Bear expected. Bear tells him Nikki suddenly confessed her love, that they went back to his place, and that things got intimate. But even as he says it, he can't sound happy. Something about the whole situation feels wrong. Nikki isn't acting like herself. While they talk, she stands at the counter nearby, staring at them almost constantly. Bear lowers his voice and tells Ian more her father's cancer, the kiss, how she seemed to snap out of it all at once but leaves out one detail entirely, the wish willow. Ian listens, then offers a more ordinary explanation. Maybe Nikki's under serious emotional pressure, especially with her father sick, or maybe she took too much medication and wasn't fully in control of herself. Either way, he thinks Bear should encourage her to see a doctor instead of assuming something supernatural is going on. By evening, everyone starts leaving work. Bear expects Nikki might want to go home with him, especially after everything that's happened between them. Instead, she walks out with Ian without a word to Bear, leaving him unsettled all over again. Later, Bear calls Ian from home and asks if Nikki seemed weird while they were together. Ian says no, she seemed perfectly normal, and Bear is probably overthinking it. Not long after the call, someone knocks on his door. It's Nikki. She explains that what happened the night before was because she was high on some medication, that's why she acted so strangely. Then, before Bear can respond, she tells him she knows he has feelings for her. Bear still can't say the words directly. Instead of confessing, he asks if she likes him too. Without hesitation, she says yes, then goes further and tells him she loves him. From that point on, Bear and Nikki are officially a couple. For a while, everything looks exactly like the life Bear had secretly hoped for. They go out together, watch movies, spend evenings on dates, and stay up talking late into the night. Nikki gives him attention, affection, and the closeness he'd always wanted from her. To him, it feels almost unreal, like the version of love he'd kept imagining has suddenly become real. But the perfect feeling doesn't last. One evening over dinner at a restaurant, Bear casually asks how her father is doing. The question immediately changes her mood. Instead of answering, she quickly steers the conversation elsewhere. Bear notices the dodge, but before he can press her, his phone starts ringing. It's Ian, calling again and again. Nikki tells him he should answer. When he finally picks up, Ian's voice is tense. Nikki's father isn't sick at all. He doesn't have cancer. He's completely fine. Then Ian adds something even worse. A few weeks earlier, Nikki told Sarah she only saw Bear as a little brother. That information hits Bear hard. Everything suddenly feels connected in the worst possible way. The fake story about her father, the sudden affection, the strange behavior, the wish. He becomes more convinced than ever that something is deeply wrong. He returns to the table, trying to hide the panic rising inside him. Nikki smiles at him like nothing has happened and hands him a gift. Inside is a tiger's eye stone that belonged to her mother, meant, she explains, to give confidence and willpower. When Bear asks why she's giving it to him, she looks at him with unsettling sincerity and says she loves him more than anyone else in the world. Words that land like a warning, almost exactly what he wished for. Bear stares at her, then carefully asks if her father really has cancer. The smile drops from her face. She freezes, staring without blinking, then starts repeating, "No, no," as if the question is tearing something open inside her. She stands up, visibly unraveling. Bear tries to calm her down. She starts crying, saying they were having such a nice date, as if his question has ruined everything. Realizing she's spiraling, he gently gets her to sit back down and tells her it doesn't matter, even though they both know it absolutely does. Later, back at Bear's house, the mood is completely different. They lie in bed together, but Nikki is strangely still beside him, almost lifeless, like a body with no energy left. Bear can't relax, but exhaustion eventually takes over. Before dawn, not even 4 a.m., he wakes to find her curled in the corner of the room, shaking, crying, staring into nothing. Then she screams at him, asking why he doesn't love her as much as she loves him. He tries to speak gently and tells her to come back to bed, but she only tells him to go back to sleep. Feeling helpless, he does but soon she wakes him again with another scream, this time standing in front of him holding a vase. It's for his cat, she says, then lies back down beside him as if that explanation should make everything normal. The next morning, Bear looks in the bathroom mirror and notices something wrong with his hair. Someone has cut it while he was asleep. He returns to the bedroom and confronts Nikki, and from her reaction realizes she's the one who did it. He tries to explain, as gently as possible, almost like talking to a child, that cutting someone's hair while they sleep isn't okay, that it's strange, and that she must never do it again. She looks ashamed and apologizes. For a second she seems embarrassed by her own behavior, but then gives him a long, unnatural smile, kisses him softly, and says she loves him. Bear tries to leave for work, desperate to put some distance between them, but when he reaches the front door he finds it sealed shut with tape from the inside. The sight unsettles him completely. He manages to pull it loose and get the door open, but the whole time Nikki stands inside, silently watching, her expression frozen in that same frightening smile. The moment turns even more disturbing when she urinates on herself without moving, as if her mind has slipped somewhere far away. At work, Bear is visibly shaken, trying to act normal while falling apart inside. When he opens his lunchbox, he finds food packed with cute little notes and photos tucked inside, as if Nikki is trying to smother him with affection. Sarah notices something is wrong and comes over to comfort him, unaware of just how terrifying his situation has become. Bear tries to steady himself and starts eating, but his mind keeps circling back to what Ian told him. As Sarah sits beside him, he finally opens up, repeating what Ian said about Nikki's father being perfectly healthy and about her once calling Bear more of a little brother than a romantic interest. Sarah listens carefully, and the more she hears, the more unsettled she becomes. She admits the whole thing feels strange. One moment Nikki barely seemed interested in him that way, and then almost overnight they were suddenly together, acting like an intense couple. That kind of sudden shift doesn't feel normal to her. She tells Bear something is definitely off. Before the conversation can go any deeper, Sarah's father arrives with terrible news of his own. Her college application has been rejected again. The words hit her hard, and she completely breaks down, crushed by the disappointment. For a while, her own pain takes over the moment, and Bear does his best to be there for her. Eventually she leans her head against his shoulder, emotionally drained, trying to turn the sadness into a joke so she doesn't fully fall apart. For a brief second it feels like a small, quiet moment of comfort between them, but then Sarah notices something sticking out of Bear's jacket, a folded note. Curious, she pulls it out and reads it. It mentions his dead cat. At first Bear doesn't understand why Nikki would leave a note about the cat with his lunch. Then the horrifying realization hits him. He looks down at the sandwich he's been eating, and everything connects in the worst possible way. Nikki didn't just pack him lunch, she used the meat of his dead cat to make it. The thought twists his stomach instantly, and he can't hold it in. Sickened and horrified, he rushes away and throws up. Later, as Bear heads home, Ian stops him, not joking around this time, but genuinely frustrated. From Ian's point of view, Bear is taking advantage of Nikki while she's clearly emotionally unstable. He's noticed how strange things have become and is keeping his distance. The easy friendship between them feels strained. Bear tries to defend himself, but Ian isn't convinced. To test him, Ian invites him to a boys' night out, Nikki not invited. If Bear really isn't using her, Ian says, he should be able to spend one night away from her. Bear agrees, partly to prove Ian wrong and partly because he desperately needs space. After Ian leaves, Bear notices the wish willow box again and sees a phone number printed on the packaging. Desperate for answers, he calls it. The voice that answers isn't mysterious or dramatic. It sounds bored, casual, almost annoyed, like just another customer service call. Bear asks about the wish, and the man tells him plainly that the love created by the wish willow isn't real. It's not a miracle, it's a curse. But he adds that usually doesn't matter to people, as long as they get what they asked for. Shaken, Bear asks if the wish can be changed. The man says that's impossible, once made, it can't be rewritten. There's only one option. He can cancel it. But Bear hesitates. Some part of him is still trapped in the fantasy that Nikki loves him. The man explains the truth more brutally. As long as Bear is alive, Nikki will stay trapped in this twisted state forever, controlled by the wish, forced into a version of love that's turning her into something broken and terrifying. Then, to make the nightmare land, the man lets him hear Nikki's screams through the phone. They're horrifying. Fear takes over, and Bear rushes home as fast as he can. When he gets inside, he finds Nikki still there, in the same disturbed condition, drenched in sweat, covered in vomit, completely wrecked. As soon as she sees him, she starts crying and apologizing over and over, like she knows something terrible has happened but can't fully control herself. Shaken, Bear tells her to go take a shower. While she's in the bathroom, he stands outside the door, barely able to speak, and finally asks the question that's been eating him alive. Did she cook his cat? Nikki goes silent. The silence says enough. Horrified and heartbroken, Bear tells her she can't do things like that. Not angry in a normal way, but broken, scared, disgusted all at once. Nikki eventually answers in a calm, obedient voice, calling him honey and saying okay, as if she's just been corrected for a small mistake instead of something monstrous. Trying to move past the unbearable moment, Bear mentions the boys' night out. Nikki immediately says she'll come. He reminds her it's supposed to be just the guys, meaning she can't come. Her mood flips instantly. She screams that this is strange, because according to her, Sarah told her she was going. Realizing there's no safe way to argue with her, Bear gives in, exhausted, and says she can come. Her reaction flips again, and she starts screaming with excitement. At the bar, Ian is furious the moment he sees Bear walking with Nikki. He pulls him aside and scolds him for breaking his promise. Bear has no good answer. He knows he was supposed to come alone, but also knows refusing Nikki has become dangerous. They rejoin the group, everyone trying to act normal, chatting and joking, but Nikki's energy is completely off. Every time Bear says even the smallest funny thing, she laughs far too loud, much harder than the joke deserves. The others notice, and the atmosphere turns uncomfortable as everyone pretends not to see how strange she's acting. Eventually they start playing Jenga. When it's Nikki's turn, she has to tell a story. Instead of something light, she starts retelling Hansel and Gretel, but twists it into something violent, grotesque, and deeply disturbing. Her version gets so dark that the whole bar seems to quiet around her. No one knows whether to laugh, interrupt, or just wait for it to end. Then it's Bear's turn. His dare, kiss the girl next to him, Sarah. Before he can react, Nikki stands up. She doesn't scream at first. She calmly walks behind Sarah, pulls her chair away, and sits beside Bear herself, positioning herself as the one he's supposed to kiss. The calmness makes it even more unsettling. Then she explodes, yelling that everyone there is going to die because none of them understand what real love is, that none of them have ever felt anything as powerful or pure as the love she has for Bear. The group goes silent. Nobody knows how to respond, and then she smiles and says she's only joking. For half a second it almost feels like the tension might break, but her expression shifts again, the madness rushing back. She grabs a glass bottle, smashes it, and starts hitting herself in the head with the broken edge right in front of everyone. Blood sprays as people scream and scramble backward. Bear jumps in and manages to stop her before she can do worse damage. He gets her out of the bar and rushes her to the hospital, but they refuse to admit her, leaving him no choice but to bring her back home. At the house, Bear tries to reach the real Nikki buried somewhere inside her. Tells her she's frightening everyone, that this isn't who she is, that something is wrong. She only smiles at him with that same unsettling affection and tells him she's his freaky Nikki. The name hits him like a nightmare coming full circle. He goes to the bathroom to get away for a moment, but she follows the conversation from outside, asking why he can't simply tell her he loves her. Bear finally cracks. He says this is what he thought he wanted, but it isn't what she wanted. She argues back, insisting she did want this, that she does love him. The argument grows more intense. Bear begs her to be herself again and the real Nikki, not this version created by the wish. She breaks down into hysterical crying. He manages to calm her, or thinks he does. Then something even stranger happens. She starts moving backward toward the bedroom, but her feet twist unnaturally as she walks, a movement so wrong Bear can only stare in fear. She tells him not to be scared, that she'd never hurt him, but he's already terrified. He says he thinks she should sleep alone and that he'll check on her in the morning. She doesn't accept that. The idea of being separated from him upsets her immediately. Realizing he has no real choice, he ends up sleeping beside her again. In the middle of the night, Bear wakes with Nikki lying peacefully in his arms. For once, she looks calm, almost normal. Then his phone lights up with a message from Sarah, saying she needs to see him right away. He replies that he can't come, but Sarah warns that if he doesn't meet her, she'll come to his house herself. That's a problem. If Sarah shows up and Nikki sees her, there's no telling what might happen. So Bear quietly tries to slip out of bed without waking Nikki, moving carefully, barely breathing. But just as he's about to leave, she opens her eyes. This time something's different. The wildness is gone. For the first time in what feels like forever, Bear sees the real Nikki looking back at him, her eyes full of tears, terror, and exhaustion. She knows what's been happening. She knows what the other version of herself is capable of. In a whisper, she begs him to kill her. She doesn't want that other version to wake up again. Devastated, Bear can't process what she's asking, and can't bear to stay either. Broken and overwhelmed, he leaves the house and goes to meet Sarah. When he finds her, Sarah tells him what she believes is happening. Nikki is manipulating him. She says Nikki hates her father, so the cancer story never made sense. Just another strange lie. Anyone looking at this from the outside, she insists, can see how absurd and dangerous it's become. Nikki doesn't need Bear enabling her. She needs serious help, needs therapy. Then Sarah pulls out her college acceptance letter, which until this moment she still hadn't opened. For a few seconds, the nightmare around Bear almost fades into the background. She opens it, realizes she's finally been accepted, and the two of them share a small, emotional smile. One of the only gentle moments Bear's had in a long time. But the relief doesn't last. Sarah then tells him something that turns his world upside down. Ian and Nikki had been secretly involved for quite a while. According to Sarah, Nikki may have started everything not out of love, but to hurt Ian. Dragging Bear into this mess is a twisted form of revenge. Bear barely has time to process this before Nikki suddenly appears and charges the car. In an instant, the situation turns horrifying. She grabs Sarah and violently smashes her head against a brick, again and again, with terrifying force. It happens so fast and so brutally that Sarah dies right there. Bear goes completely still, unable to speak or move, staring frozen in shock as if his mind has disconnected from what his eyes are seeing. Nikki walks over to him afterward with disturbing calmness. This is his fault. She tells him he made the wish, so now he has to help her clean up what happened. Too broken and terrified to fight back, Bear helps her hide Sarah's body. Later, driving alone through the night, Bear glances at Sarah's college acceptance letter lying on the passenger seat, now stained with her blood. The sight destroys him. She'd just gotten the future she wanted, and moments later it was taken from her. He finally loses control and screams in agony, crushed by guilt and horror. Desperate to undo everything, he drives straight back to the shop where he bought the wish willow. This time a different shopkeeper is there. Seeing Bear falling apart, the man immediately understands something terrible has happened and asks, calmly but seriously, what he's done. Bear says he needs to reverse the wish. The shopkeeper explains that canceling it is possible, but the cost Bear already knows is that for the wish to end naturally, he would have to die. However, there's another possibility. If someone else makes a wish that directly contradicts Bear's, It might override the curse. Bear doesn't waste a second. He buys another wish willow and tries to make the wish himself, hoping to undo what he started. But when he tries to break it, the toy won't snap. That's when he understands the rule: he can't be the one to fix it. Someone else has to make the wish. He rushes to find Ian, who's already terrified. He's received dozens of disturbing messages from Sarah's phone, all telling him to come to Bear's house. Ian knows something is wrong but has no idea how bad it really is. Bear starts to leave, then turns back, realizing Ian is his only chance. He tries to explain everything as fast and clearly as he can: the wish, the curse, Nikki, how it forced her into this horrifying obsession. Then he hands Ian the toy and begs him to use it. All Ian has to do is wish for Nikki to be free, but Ian doesn't believe him. To him, Bear sounds completely unstable, the whole story too absurd, too impossible, too insane. In frustration, he takes the wish willow and mocks the situation by wishing for billions of dollars instead, then snaps it in half. A second later, money starts raining down from the ceiling. Ian freezes. Now he knows Bear was telling the truth, but the realization comes too late. The one chance to save Nikki has been wasted, and Bear's last real hope disappears right in front of him. He returns home already dreading what he might find, but nothing could prepare him for the sight waiting inside. Sarah's dead body placed in the room like some grotesque display, bloody, disturbing, completely inhuman. Bear stands there, unable to move, horrified by how far everything has gone. Nikki is inside too, spiraling deeper into madness. She screams at him, demanding to know why he doesn't love her the way she loves him. Then in another burst of violence slams her own head, hurting herself in front of him. At that moment, Ian arrives and starts knocking at the door. Bear sees that Nikki has a gun in her hand. He tries to calm her, telling her everything will be okay, begging her to put the gun down. But she keeps screaming, completely consumed by the cursed love controlling her. When Ian finally steps inside, she turns and shoots him without hesitation. Bear panics. With Ian bleeding nearby and Nikki still unstable, he shouts the only words he thinks might stop her. He tells her he loves her. For the first time, Nikki calms down. Bear moves closer and hugs her tightly. On the outside it looks like comfort, but inside, he's already made a decision. He knows the curse will never stop while he's alive. If he can't undo the wish through someone else, there's only one way left. He goes into the bathroom and tries to turn the gun on himself. But when the moment comes, he can't pull the trigger as hands shake. Fear takes over. Then he looks toward the medicine cabinet, opens it, grabs every sleeping pill he can find, and swallows them all at once. From the other side of the bathroom door, Nikki's voice comes softly, telling him everything is okay. But almost immediately, Bear realizes what he's done. Panic hits him. He tries desperately to make himself throw the pills back up, but it's already too late. The medication is inside him, and time is running out. Then he hears a familiar sound from outside the bathroom door, another wish willow snapping. Bear suddenly smiles. He steps out and sees that Nikki has found the last hidden wish willow in the house and made one final wish, that Bear would love her exactly as much as she loves him. For a quiet moment, the two of them simply look at each other. No screaming, no fighting, no panic, just a silent, intense stare between two people trapped at the center of a nightmare. Then they move closer and kiss. But Bear has already swallowed the pills. The overdose takes hold. His body weakens, and he collapses to the floor. Within moments, he dies. Nikki is destroyed by his death. The grief hits her with unbearable force, and without Bear she no longer sees any reason to keep living. She prepares to end her own life too, but just before she can, Bear's death finally breaks the curse. Nikki snaps back into herself as the madness disappears, and the real Nikki returns, confused, terrified, shattered. Slowly the memories flood back, piece by piece, the obsession, the violence, the blood, the people who died because of the wish. Now fully awake again, she finally understands the horror of everything she's done. At the center of obsession, the setup is almost laughably simple. A guy likes a girl, He can't tell her properly. He gets embarrassed, frustrated, desperate. Then he finds this strange little object called the One-Wish Willow, breaks it, and makes the kind of wish that sounds romantic only if you don't think about it for more than 2 seconds. That Nikki would love him more than anything. And that's basically where the movie starts tightening its grip. What I like about this premise is that it doesn't waste time pretending to be more complicated than it is. The movie knows this is a wish gone wrong story. We've seen cursed objects before. Seen characters ask for something they shouldn't only to discover magic has a cruel sense of humor. But Obsession still manages to make that old idea feel uncomfortable again. Mainly because the wish itself is already kind of disturbing. Bear doesn't wish to be better. He doesn't wish for courage. He doesn't wish for a real chance with Nikki. He wishes for Nikki to want him. That difference matters, because at first you can understand where he's coming from. He's awkward, clearly insecure, stuck in that painful place where someone wants to say something honest but keeps swallowing the words at the last second. There's a bit of second-hand embarrassment in watching him try to build up the courage and fail over and over. And honestly, that part feels human. A lot of people know what it's like to freeze when emotions get too real. But then the wish happens, and suddenly the movie asks you to look at that desire from another angle. What Bear wants isn't love in the normal sense. It's not mutual, it's not earned, it's not even really Nikki choosing him. It's Nikki being forced into the shape of his fantasy. The scary thing is that the movie doesn't immediately turn this into some huge moral speech. It just lets the situation unfold, and the more it unfolds, the more wrong it feels. At first, the wish almost seems to have worked exactly the way Bear wanted. Nikki comes back into his life with sudden intensity. She wants to be near him, says the things he probably imagined hearing, gives him the attention he was too afraid to ask for. For a few moments, you can see how he might fool himself into thinking this is some miracle, but the film is smart enough to make the miracle feel off right away. There's something unnatural about the speed of it, something too intense, too needy, too much. Nikki isn't slowly realizing feelings she'd buried. She's suddenly overwhelmed by something that doesn't feel like her. Once you notice that, the romance completely dies, and what's left is a horrible, tightening sense that Bear has opened a door he has no idea how to close. That's where Obsession gets under your skin. The premise isn't scary because of the object itself. The One-Wish Willow is almost silly when you first hear about it. The kind of weird little thing you'd see in a novelty shop and laugh at. But once it works, that silliness becomes creepy. The movie takes something that should feel harmless and turns it into the source of a very personal nightmare. And the personal scale matters here. This isn't a giant supernatural disaster. The world isn't ending. There are no ancient demons explaining rules for 20 minutes. It's just one bad wish, one relationship, and two people trapped in the consequences. That smaller scale makes it feel more intense. The horror stays close to Bear and Nikki, so every uncomfortable look, every strange line, every sudden mood shift feels bigger than it should. The best thing about the setup is that it gives the movie a strong emotional engine. Bear wanted control without admitting he wanted control, and Nikki becomes the result of that. She's not just the girl who becomes obsessed. She's the living consequence of his wish. Every time she gets more intense, more unpredictable, more frightening, the movie is basically throwing Bear's own desire back in his face, and that makes the whole thing feel mean in a really effective way. Because the wish does come true. That's the cruel joke. Bear gets exactly what he asked for, not what he needed, not what would make him happy. Exactly what he asked for. Nikki loves him more than anything, and it's horrifying. That's why the premise works so well. It's simple enough to understand instantly, but the longer you sit with it, the uglier it becomes. What starts as an awkward crush turns into a supernatural punishment. What looks like wish fulfillment becomes a nightmare about desire, consent, and the danger of wanting someone so badly you stop thinking of them as a person. For a horror movie, that's a pretty strong place to begin. What's funny about Obsession is that if you strip away the cursed object and all the blood and screaming that comes later, the beginning almost plays like the setup for a messy little romantic comedy. You've got Bear, This painfully awkward guy who's clearly been carrying feelings for Nikki for a long time. You've got the workplace dynamic, the friend giving advice, the nervous build-up to a confession, the little gift he wants to give her, and that classic moment where the character just needs to say the thing out loud. And of course, he doesn't. That's where the movie starts to feel real in a slightly uncomfortable way. Bear isn't written like some smooth movie crush who says the perfect thing at the perfect time. He fumbles, overthinks, waits too long, gets right to the edge of honesty and then backs away. You can almost feel the movie teasing a version of itself where this becomes a sweet, awkward love story, but that version never arrives. Instead, Curry Barker takes all those familiar romantic beats and lets them rot. The cute confession scene becomes a humiliation, the sentimental gift becomes part of the curse, the crush doesn't become a relationship through honesty or emotional growth, it becomes a nightmare because Bear chooses fantasy over vulnerability. That's what makes the opening work so well. The movie understands the language of romance just enough to corrupt it. Trivia night, the workplace banter, the nervous car ride, the almost confession, that these are all things that could belong in a completely different film. But here, every one of them slowly starts feeling wrong. And honestly, that's more interesting than if the movie had opened as pure horror right away. Because for a little while you can see what Bear wants the story to be. He wants the easy movie version, Nikki suddenly realizing she's loved him all along. The big emotional payoff without the terrifying possibility of rejection. He wants romance to happen to him without having to actually risk anything. That's such a small human flaw. But the film turns it into something poisonous. The romantic comedy setup is basically the bait and makes you understand Bear's fantasy before the movie punishes it. Once Nikki's behavior changes, those earlier cute moments look different. The awkward crush stops feeling harmless. The hesitation stops feeling innocent. The wish turns the entire romantic framework into something deeply uncomfortable. Because in a normal romance, love is about two people moving toward each other, an obsession. Only one person gets to choose. That difference flips the whole genre on its head. Nikki doesn't fall for Bear because she sees him differently, and she doesn't choose him after some heartfelt realization. She's pulled into his desire by force, and the movie lets that forced romance get uglier scene by scene. So the film isn't just using romance as decoration, it's attacking the fantasy where one person believes their feelings are so strong that they deserve to be returned. That's a very specific kind of entitlement, and obsession takes it to the most extreme place possible. The result is this weirdly uncomfortable blend where the beginning almost invites you to laugh at Bear's awkwardness, but later you start questioning why you were laughing at all. The movie makes the familiar feel unsafe. It takes the softest parts of a love story and sharpens them into horror. And that's why the setup sticks. Obsession doesn't become scary by leaving romance behind. It becomes scary by showing what happens when romance is built on control instead of choice. Obsession is very aware it's playing with one of the oldest horror ideas in the book. Somebody finds a strange object, makes a wish. The wish works, and then very quickly they realize they should have left the thing exactly where they found it. We've seen that structure a lot. Horror has been warning people about magical shortcuts forever, and honestly, the lesson is usually pretty obvious. Don't mess with creepy little objects from mysterious shops. Don't trust something that promises you the one thing you want most, and definitely don't make emotional decisions while holding a cursed-looking stick. But that's also part of why this movie is fun. The One Wish Willow has that perfect, low-rent cursed object energy. It doesn't look like some ancient artifact that belongs in a museum. It feels more like something you'd find in a shop between crystals, charms, incense, and other things you're not fully sure are serious or just decoration. There's something almost funny about it at first, like this is the thing that's going to ruin everyone's life, and then it does. That contrast helps the film a lot. The object itself isn't grand or intimidating. It's small, weird, almost silly. But horror often works best when something harmless looking becomes dangerous. The movie doesn't need to over-explain it with a huge backstory or a long mythology dump. It just lets the wish happen. And once it happens, the situation becomes horrible enough on its own. In a way, that simplicity is what makes it feel like an old-fashioned cautionary tale. Obsession isn't trying to reinvent the entire cursed object formula, it's taking that familiar structure and asking, okay, what if the wish wasn't for money or fame or power? What if it was for love? Or more specifically, what if it was for control over love? That tiny shift makes the formula feel nastier, because the wish is personal. It's not some abstract supernatural deal, it directly changes another person. Nikki becomes the cost of Bear's mistake, and that makes the curse feel more intimate than usual. The horror isn't coming from a monster hiding in the woods or a demon crawling out of a wall, it's coming from a wish that rewrites someone's emotions and traps both people inside the result. And the movie is smart enough not to treat the wish as a clean fantasy that simply goes too far. It feels wrong almost immediately. Even before things turn violent, there's a strange discomfort in the air. Nikki's sudden affection is too fast, too intense, too unnatural. Bear gets what he asked for, but the movie makes sure we never fully enjoy it with him. That's where the be careful what you wish for idea actually lands. A weaker version of this story might have spent too much time enjoying the fantasy before turning it dark. Obsession doesn't really do that. It gives Bear just enough time to believe, maybe, that this is what he wanted, and then it starts tightening the screws. Every sweet moment carries something rotten underneath. Every romantic gesture feels infected. And that's the cruel joke of the whole setup. The wish doesn't betray Bear by twisting his words in some random technical way. It gives him exactly what he asked for. Nikki loves him more than anything, completely, intensely, without balance, without freedom, without a self outside of him. That's not a loophole, that's the horror. So yes, obsession is built on a familiar formula. You can feel the shadow of older wish gone wrong stories hanging over it. But the movie works because it chooses a wish that's emotionally ugly from the start. It turns the cursed object trope into something less about magic and more about entitlement. The one wish willow may be the supernatural trigger, but Bear's desire is the real cursed object here. That's why the formula still has bite. The movie isn't scary because it tells us wishes can go wrong. It's scary because in this case, the wish going right is already the worst possible outcome. Bear is a genuinely interesting character, because the movie almost tricks you into feeling bad for him before slowly making you question whether you should. At the start he seems harmless, maybe a little pathetic, but not dangerous. Shy, awkward, clearly trapped inside his own head. He likes Nikki, but instead of being honest, he keeps circling the truth. He rehearses, hesitates, waits for the perfect moment, and then backs out right when it arrives. That kind of thing is embarrassing to watch, but believable to a lot of people have been there in some form, not with a cursed wish object, hopefully, but with that fear of saying the wrong thing, ruining a friendship, or hearing the answer they don't want. So early on, Bear feels like someone you can understand, even if he's frustrating. But then the movie starts pulling that sympathy apart. Because Bear's problem isn't just that he's nervous, it's that he's passive in a way that becomes selfish. He doesn't want to risk rejection, but he still wants the reward of being loved. He wants the emotional payoff without the emotional courage. And when he gets the chance to make a wish, he doesn't wish to become braver, more honest, or clearer. He wishes for Nikki to change. That says a lot about him. What makes it worse is that once the wish starts working, he doesn't immediately reject it. He knows something is off, anyone would have, but he still lets himself enjoy parts of it, still steps into the fantasy even though it's clearly built on something wrong. That's where the character becomes uncomfortable in a good way. The movie doesn't turn him into a cartoon villain sitting there laughing like some evil mastermind. He's scared, confused, overwhelmed, but being overwhelmed doesn't erase what he did. And I like that obsession doesn't give him an easy pass just because he looks weak. Weakness can still hurt people. That's kind of the whole point with Bear. His cowardice isn't neutral. His self-pity isn't innocent. His inability to deal with his feelings creates damage, and his refusal to fully take responsibility makes everything worse. He keeps acting like the nightmare is something that happened to him, when really it happened because of him. Michael Johnston plays that balance well. Bear is irritating, but not unbelievable. You can see the fear in him, see the guilt starting to creep in, and also see the part of him that still wants to pretend this counts as love. That's a difficult line to walk if Bear becomes too sympathetic. The movie loses its bite if he becomes too openly awful. The moral tension disappears. Instead he stays messy. He's the victim of the consequences, but also the person who opened the door. He's trapped, but he helped build the trap. He's terrified of Nikki, but Nikki wouldn't be in this state if he hadn't wished away her choice in the first place. That makes watching him genuinely uncomfortable, especially as he starts realizing what he's done but still can't bring himself to act with any real strength. He's always a step behind the truth, always reacting too late, always hoping for an easier way out. And honestly, that feels painfully human, not heroic, not admirable, just human. Bear is the kind of horror protagonist who makes you yell at the screen not because his decisions are random, but because they come from flaws you can actually recognize: fear, shame, desire, avoidance, wanting something without wanting to pay the emotional cost of asking for it honestly. By the time the movie fully turns against him, it feels earned. Obsession works because Bear isn't just unlucky, he's responsible. Maybe not in a clean, simple way a villain is responsible, but in a more uncomfortable way. He's responsible because he wanted control and called it love. He's responsible because he chose fantasy over honesty. And he's responsible because even when the fantasy became horrifying, part of him still wanted to believe it was his dream coming true. That's what makes him such a strong center for the movie, not because he's likable all the time, but because he's exactly the kind of person who would make the wish, regret it, and still take too long to understand why it was wrong from the beginning. One of the more uncomfortable things obsession does is take the nice guy fantasy and drag it into the light. Bear doesn't look like a threat at first, that's the whole point. He's not aggressive in the obvious way, not loud, not forceful. He's awkward, quiet, nervous, kind of sad, the type of guy a movie might normally ask us to root for because he just needs a chance. But obsession is smarter than that. It understands that someone can seem harmless and still be selfish, can be shy and still feel entitled, can look emotionally wounded and still do something deeply wrong. Bear's problem isn't just that he loves Nikki from a distance, it's that somewhere in his mind, his feelings start to matter more than her choice. That's where the movie gets nasty, because Bear doesn't wish for a conversation. He doesn't wish for courage or the ability to accept whatever answer Nikki gives him. He wishes for her to love him fully, completely, more than anything. Sit with that for a moment, and it's horrifying before the horror even begins. The wish turns Nikki into the object of Bear's desire in the most literal sense possible. She stops being a person with her own emotional life and becomes the answer to his loneliness. That's what romantic objectification looks like when you push it into supernatural horror. It's not just I want her, it's I want her feelings to belong to me. The film doesn't pause to lecture you about this, which I appreciate. It just lets the wrongness build in the scenes. Nikki's sudden affection isn't romantic, even when Bear wants to believe it is. Her choices aren't really choices. Her love isn't really love, she's being moved by something forced onto her. And Bear knows that, maybe not immediately or fully, but he knows enough. He sees how unnatural it is, sees how distressed and unstable she becomes, sees that the Nikki in front of him isn't acting from genuine freedom. But for a while he still lets the fantasy continue, because it gives him what he wanted. That's the hardest part to watch, not the blood, the screaming, or even the violence, but watching Bear try to convince himself this can somehow still count as a relationship. Watching him accept affection he knows wasn't freely given. Watching him enjoy the dream after the movie has already shown us it's rotten. That's where consent becomes the real horror of the movie. Obsession isn't only asking what if someone loved you too much, it's asking what if that love was never theirs to give. And once that question is in the room, every romantic moment becomes poisoned. A touch feels wrong, a confession feels wrong, intimacy feels wrong, because Nikki has been robbed of the ability to choose. The nice guy myth usually depends on the idea that wanting someone badly enough makes you deserving. Like patience, longing, and emotional suffering are supposed to eventually earn love. But the film tears that apart. Bear's pain doesn't give him ownership over Nikki, his insecurity doesn't excuse what he asks for, his loneliness doesn't make the wish less invasive. If anything, that's what makes it worse. Because this isn't a villain taking power for power's sake, it's a weak person using magic to avoid rejection. In some ways that feels more believable, more pathetic maybe, but also more disturbing. The movie takes a very ordinary emotional flaw and shows how ugly it becomes when there are no limits. Bear wanted to skip the risk of being vulnerable. Instead, he erased Nikki's autonomy. That's why the movie stays with you longer than a basic cursed object story should. The supernatural part is creepy, sure, but the emotional truth underneath it is what really stings. Obsession understands that control can hide inside romance. It understands that being nice doesn't mean being good. And it understands that love without consent isn't love at all, it's possession. Once the movie makes that clear, you can never look at Bear's wish the same way again. What makes Obsession more uncomfortable than a normal supernatural horror movie is that the curse doesn't feel completely separate from real life. Obviously the One-Wish Willow is fantasy. Nobody is walking around snapping a magic stick and rewriting someone's emotions. But the relationship dynamic that comes out of it feels a lot less imaginary. Once Nikki becomes attached to Bear, the movie starts playing with a very specific kind of relationship horror, not the loud, obvious version at first, but the kind where someone's entire world starts shrinking around one person. Suddenly there's no space, no privacy, no emotional balance, no room to breathe. Everything becomes about staying together, proving love, needing reassurance, making sure the other person never leaves. That's where the film gets genuinely suffocating. Nikki's obsession is supernatural, but the behavior has a recognizable shape, the constant need to be near Bear, the emotional explosions, the fear of abandonment, the way love turns into monitoring, clinging, threatening, and eventually violence. It's exaggerated. Of course the movie pushes everything into horror movie territory, but underneath the chaos there's something uncomfortably familiar about how toxic attachment works. The film understands that obsession isn't just loving someone too much. That phrase almost sounds romantic if you say it lazily enough, but obsession shows the uglier truth. Loving someone too much can become control. It can become emotional pressure, a kind of prison where one person's need completely swallows the other person's life. Bear is stuck in that prison, but the sick irony is that he helped create it. That's what gives the relationship such a twisted edge. Nikki is the one acting frightening, becoming unpredictable, whose attachment turns dangerous. But Bear is the reason she's like this. He wanted her love to revolve around him, and now it does, completely and horribly, without any healthy limit. The movie keeps returning to that idea of space, or really the lack of it. In a healthy relationship, two people still get to remain two people. They can love each other without disappearing into each other. Here, that separation is gone. Nikki's whole identity starts collapsing into Bear. Her emotions are no longer her own. Her reality bends around him. And that's not romantic, it's terrifying. There's also something interesting in how the outside characters read the situation. Ian looks at Bear and thinks he's taking advantage of Nikki. Sarah looks at Nikki and thinks she might be using Bear. Neither of them fully understands what's happening, but both sense something rotten in the dynamic, which feels very true to life. People outside a toxic relationship often catch fragments. They notice changes, see red flags, but don't always know where the danger is really coming from. In Obsession, everyone is partly right and partly wrong. Bear is being harmed by Nikki's obsession, yes, but Nikki is also being harmed by Bear's wish. The relationship becomes toxic from both angles, not because both people made equal choices, but because the wish has created a situation where love has been replaced by dependency. Bear becomes the center of Nikki's existence, and Nikki becomes the consequence Bear can't escape. That's why the movie feels so claustrophobic even when nothing violent is happening. The scariest moments aren't always the ones with blood or screaming. Sometimes it's just Nikki looking at Bear like he's the only thing keeping her alive. Sometimes it's the way she can't tolerate distance. Sometimes it's the way Bear realizes the affection he thought he wanted now feels like a hand around his throat. The film takes codependency and makes it literally two people trapped in a bond that should never have existed, where there's no normal version of it to return to, no cute phase before things go bad. The foundation itself is corrupt, and that's what makes the horror work. Obsession isn't just saying wouldn't it be scary if your crush became obsessed with you? That would be a much cheaper movie. What it's really saying is, what if the kind of love you thought you wanted was actually control? And what if once you got it, you realized control feels a lot like being trapped? That question gives the film its bite, because by the time Nikki's behavior becomes openly dangerous, the emotional horror has already been there for a while. The violence is only the final form of something that was wrong from the moment Bear made the wish. Nikki's transformation is easily the thing that gives obsession most of its punch. When the movie first introduces her, she doesn't feel like a horror character. She feels like someone Bear has built up in his head for a long time. She's warm enough, familiar enough, and casual enough that you understand why he likes her, but she's also not written as some perfect dream girl floating through the story. She feels like a real person with her own life, her own moods, her own plans, and her own distance from Bear. That matters, because the horror only works if we believe there was a normal Nikki before the wish, and at the start, there is. She talks to him like a co-worker, maybe a friend, maybe someone who knows there's something unsaid between them. There's a slightly awkward social tension around the two of them, but it still feels grounded. Nothing about her screams future nightmare. She's just Nikki. Then the wish happens, and something in her changes. Not all at once, not cartoonishly. That's what I liked. The movie doesn't immediately turn her into a screaming monster. At first it's more subtle. She comes back with a strange intensity, like someone's turned the volume up too high on every emotion she has. Her affection is too sudden, her attention is too focused, her need for Bear feels too sharp. And that's where the discomfort starts, because Bear wants this. Technically, he wished for this, but the moment Nikki begins acting on that wish, the fantasy feels wrong. It's not romantic, not cute, not the moment where the girl finally realizes she loved him all along. It feels more like something has been pushed into her mind and her body is trying to obey it. That's a genuinely creepy idea. The movie slowly lets Nikki become more unstable, more unpredictable, more frightening. In one scene she's sweet and almost vulnerable, and the next she's staring too hard, reacting too intensely, saying something that sounds loving on the surface but lands like a threat. Her emotions don't move naturally anymore. They lurch, snap, swing from affection to panic to rage so quickly that you never fully know what version of Nikki is about to enter the room. And honestly, that unpredictability is what makes her scary. A lot of horror villains are frightening because they hide in the dark or carry a weapon or stalk people from far away. Nikki is frightening because she's right there, close to Bear, speaking softly one second and completely losing control the next. The danger is intimate. It's in the same room, sometimes sitting across from him, smiling. That's a much more uncomfortable kind of threat. Her obsession grows in a way that feels almost physical. It's not just that she says she loves Bear, it's like her entire body has been reorganized around needing him. The way she moves, looks at him, reacts when she thinks he might pull away, everything starts to feel possessed by this one impossible feeling. And the more intense she becomes, the more the movie turns her into the living consequence of Bear's wish. That's the clever part. Nikki isn't scary in isolation. She's scary because every horrifying thing she does points back to what Bear asked for. He wanted her to love him more than anything. And the movie keeps asking, okay, what would that actually look like if it had no balance, no boundaries, no consent, no sense of self? The answer is Nikki after the wish, affectionate in a way that feels suffocating, then possessive, then threatening, then violent. The film lets scenes breathe long enough for the audience to sit with how strange everything feels. Sometimes just a pause, a look, a sentence that lands wrong, a silence that goes on a second longer than it should. Those tiny moments do a lot of work. There are scenes where nothing obviously horrific is happening, but you still feel tense, because the movie has trained you not to trust calm anymore. Nicky might be smiling, but the smile doesn't relax you. Bear might be standing there quietly, but his silence feels like avoidance. The room might be still, but stillness in this movie never feels safe. That's a hard thing to pull off. A lot of horror movies can make you jump. That's not easy, but it's simpler than sustaining dread. Dread is trickier, because it asks the audience to stay uncomfortable without an immediate payoff every few seconds. And Obsession is pretty good at that. It knows how to stretch a moment until you almost wish something would happen just so the tension can break, and then usually something does. But the best part is that the scary moments don't feel completely separate from the quieter scenes. The loud parts grow out of the silence, which is why they land. You've already been sitting there watching Bear pretend things are manageable, watching Nicky become more intense, watching the situation slowly curdle. So when the movie finally snaps, it feels like pressure being released in the worst possible way. The second half especially has this anxious, almost breathless quality, not because it's non-stop action, but because the emotional situation has become so unstable that even slower scenes feel dangerous. You start waiting for Nicky to turn, waiting for Bear to make another weak decision, waiting for someone outside the situation to walk into the wrong room at the wrong time. That waiting is exhausting, but in the way horror is supposed to be exhausting. There's also something clever about how the movie uses awkwardness as part of the dread. As some scenes are uncomfortable before they're scary, you laugh a little because the situation is weird, and then the laugh gets stuck because the scene keeps going. The movie doesn't always give clean emotional cues. It lets comedy, embarrassment, fear, and disgust overlap until you're not sure how you're supposed to react. That uncertainty keeps the atmosphere alive. That's one of the reasons Obsession feels more personal than a bigger, flashier horror film might. The dread isn't coming from mythology or huge supernatural rules. It's coming from being trapped in a bad emotional situation and realizing nobody in it knows how to get out cleanly. Bear can't undo what he did. Nicky can't stop what's been done to her. Everyone else is close enough to notice something is wrong, but not close enough to understand it. That's an uncomfortable place to keep an audience, and the movie knows it. It uses silence, pacing, and small behavioral shifts to make the nightmare feel like it's tightening one scene at a time. Even when the story slows down, the atmosphere usually doesn't disappear. It just sits there, waiting. For me, the dread is one of the film's biggest strengths. Not every scare lands equally, and not every slow stretch will work for every viewer, but the overall mood is strong. Obsession has that sticky kind of tension where you feel it in the room with the characters that makes normal spaces feel unsafe. Romantic attention feels suffocating, silence feel louder than it should. By the time the movie fully spirals, it doesn't feel like the horror suddenly arrived. It feels like it was standing there the whole time, quietly waiting for Bear to notice. The horror in Obsession is interesting because it doesn't rely on just one flavor of fear. Some scenes are built around dread, some around shock, some are gross in that very direct, stomach-turning way. And every now and then the movie becomes funny in a way that makes you feel slightly guilty for laughing. That mix could have been a disaster. A movie like this can easily lose its balance, too goofy, and the horror stops working, too miserable, and it becomes a chore, too reliant on jump scares, and people get tired of the pattern. But Obsession mostly finds a strange little rhythm where the comedy, violence, and discomfort all feed into each other. The jump scares are probably the easiest thing to talk about first, and the movie has some really effective ones. They're not all subtle, and they're not trying to be some are loud, aggressive, designed to make the theater react. But what helps is that the film usually builds enough tension beforehand, so the scare feels like a release instead of a cheap noise. There's a difference. A bad jump scare feels like someone clapping in your ear. A good one feels like the room has been holding its breath and something finally breaks. Obsession gets that right more often than not. The door moments, the banging, the shadow movement, the sudden changes in Nicky's behavior, simple horror tools, But they work because the movie has already made you nervous. You're watching the frame, listening to the quiet, waiting for something to go wrong, and then it does. The gore and violence are a different story. This movie can get nasty, not always in a polished, stylish, cool horror image way, but in a blunt, uncomfortable way. There are corpses, dead animal imagery, bloody moments, scenes clearly meant to make you physically recoil. Some viewers will love that, some will hate it. I understand both reactions, because there's a type of gross-out horror that doesn't scare everyone. Vomit, urine, dead animals, graphic cruelty. For some people that's disturbing, for others it's just unpleasant. Obsession uses that kind of material, and depending on your tolerance it may either make the world feel more rotten or make you feel like the movie is pushing too hard. For me, the stronger horror is when the violence feels emotionally connected. Sarah's death, for example, stands out because it's not just brutal for the sake of being brutal. It feels like the nightmare crossing a line that can't be uncrossed. Up to that point, the obsession is already dangerous, but that moment makes the consequences feel real in a much harsher way. It's aggressive, ugly, and it changes the air around the movie. The brick moment has that same nasty effectiveness, one of those horror details people remember because it's simple and direct. No complicated setup, no fancy explanation, just a brutal object used in a way that makes the audience react immediately. Then there's the Jenga scene, maybe one of the best examples of how obsession turns ordinary things into horror. Jenga isn't scary, it's a game, almost silly, but the movie uses it as a tension machine. Every small movement feels loaded, every pause feels dangerous. You're not scared of the game itself, you're scared of what it might trigger. That's smart horror filmmaking. The bar speech is another big one. For a different reason that works because it lets Nikki take over the room emotionally. It's not just about fear, it's about embarrassment, intensity, the sense that everyone around her is watching something private spill out in public. It's uncomfortable before it's scary, and that's exactly why it lands. The pi+/A colada scene has that same energy. The situation is almost absurd but also deeply wrong. You kind of want to laugh, but the laugh doesn't feel clean, catching in your throat because the movie keeps reminding you this isn't just weird behavior, it's someone being pulled apart by a wish she never made. That uncomfortable humor is one of the film's secret weapons. Obsession isn't a full horror comedy, I wouldn't describe it that way, but it has funny moments, and some are genuinely funny. Others are funny because your brain doesn't know what else to do. Nikki says or does something so extreme that the audience laughs, and then half a second later the scene turns disturbing again. That's a tricky tone to manage, but the movie seems to understand that laughter can be part of fear, especially in a theater when everyone is tense and waiting for the next horrible thing. Even a small awkward moment can make people laugh just to release pressure, and obsession uses that reaction instead of fighting it, letting scenes become cringe-worthy, strange, or absurd, then twisting the knife. What I appreciate is that most of the memorable moments aren't built from huge set pieces. This isn't a movie where you remember one giant expensive sequence and forget everything else and remember smaller things: a phone call, a look, a speech, a shadow, a game, a sound, a body, a sudden act of violence. These moments stick because they're tied to the film's central emotional problem. Bear wanted something unnatural, and now everything around him is becoming unnatural too. That's why the horror execution works. Even when the movie is being bloody or shocking, the best scenes still connect back to the wish. Nikki's violence isn't random, her intensity isn't random, the humor isn't random. It all comes from this one impossible emotional imbalance that keeps getting worse. Not every scare is perfect, some loud moments are less effective than the quieter ones. Some gross-out details will push certain viewers away instead of pulling them in. And yes, a few beats may feel like they're trying very hard to make the audience react. But when obsession hits, it really hits. It gives you scenes you want to talk about afterward. A horror that makes a crowd gasp, laugh, cringe, and look away. It understands that fear isn't always one clean emotion. Sometimes it's disgust, sometimes it's nervous laughter, Sometimes it's second-hand embarrassment. Sometimes it's watching something so wrong unfold that you can barely believe the movie is going there. That's obsession at its best. Hey, not when it's simply trying to scare you, but when it traps you between laughing, flinching, and feeling genuinely awful about what's happening. For a movie this small, Obsession looks much more confident than it probably had any right to. That's one of the first things that stands out. You're not sitting there thinking, okay, I can see the budget every 5 seconds. It doesn't have that cheap, flat look a lot of small horror films accidentally fall into. The movie knows how to use what it has. Rooms feel tight, faces matter, shadows matter, background space matters. Even when nothing huge is happening, the frame usually feels like it's holding some kind of threat. I really like the way the film uses shadows and background details. It's not always shoving the scare directly into your face. Sometimes it lets your eyes wander a little, checking the corners of the frame, wondering if something moved or if the movie just made you paranoid. That's a good place for a horror film to put its audience once people start scanning the screen on their own. The movie has already won part of the battle. The close-ups are used well too. This is a story built around discomfort, so putting us close to the characters makes sense. Bear's panic, Nikki's sudden emotional shifts, those tiny pauses before someone says the wrong thing, a lot of that wouldn't work as well from a distance. The camera makes the relationship feel too close, which is exactly the point. The sound design might be even more important than the visuals. There are moments where the sound feels like it's crawling under the scene rather than sitting on top of it. The banging, the sudden bursts, the quiet pressure in between, all of it keeps the audience tense. Even the silence has weight. The movie understands that horror isn't just about what you see. Sometimes it's about what you're waiting to hear. When it comes to effects, the practical work does a lot of heavy lifting. The violence feels physical, the bodies feel nasty, the impact moments have texture. When the movie gets brutal, it usually feels like something actually happened in the room, not like an effect pasted over the scene afterward. And that makes a big difference. There's some CGI, and for the most part it blends better than expected, though I do think a few moments push slightly beyond what the film needs. Not enough to ruin anything, but enough that you notice the movie reaching for a bigger effect when the smaller, more grounded horror was already working. Honestly, some of the quiet stuff is scarier than the loud stuff. That brings me to the flaws, because Obsession has them. The story is familiar. There's no way around that. Even with strong execution, you can feel the shape of the movie pretty early. A cursed object, a selfish wish, consequences spiraling out of control. It's a structure horror fans already know, and the film makes it work. But if someone says the plot itself isn't especially fresh, I wouldn't argue. The lore is also pretty thin. Personally, I didn't need a huge explanation of the One-Wish Willow, but I understand wanting a bit more. The movie gives you enough to follow the curse without digging deeply into where the object comes from or why it works the way it does. For some viewers that fairy tale simplicity will be part of the charm. For others it may feel underdeveloped. There are also a few logic gaps in the world of the movie. Sometimes it feels like certain characters or adult figures are just absent because their presence would make the plot harder to maintain. You can brush that aside since the movie operates like a dark fable, but you might still catch yourself asking a few practical questions along the way. And then there's the ending. I actually think it fits the movie emotionally, but I get why it will divide people. Some viewers may want something sharper, darker, or more shocking. Others may feel it brings the story together in a painful way without needing a cheap final twist. For me, the important thing is that the movie doesn't treat survival like everything is fixed. The damage has already been done. Even if the immediate nightmare reaches some kind of conclusion, nobody walks away clean. That's what gives the final stretch its weight. Obsession isn't perfect, but it has something a lot of cleaner movies don't. It lingers. You may question parts of the plot, think the hype is a little too loud, or dislike some of the gross-out choices. But there's a good chance you'll still remember Nikki's face, Bear's guilt, the awkwardness of certain scenes, and that sick feeling of watching a fantasy turn into a punishment. That's more valuable than perfection. The film works because its best elements are strong enough to cover the rough edges, and the performances are strong, the mood is strong, the sound and framing are strong, and the central idea, even if familiar, is emotionally nasty enough to keep digging under your skin. Curry Barker directs it with enough confidence that the movie feels like a real statement, not just a lucky genre exercise. So my final impression is pretty clear. Obsession is a flawed film, yes, but it's also one of those flawed films that feels alive. It has personality, it has nerve, it knows how to make a simple idea feel ugly and personal, and even when it stumbles, it never becomes boring or forgettable.